5 men. 1 boy. 1 gas station light flickering like it was trying to look away. Marcus Webb had seen plenty of things in his 52 years that he couldn't unsee. Places where the desert turned red and the sky turned green and men stopped looking like men. He had told himself, 9 years ago, when he walked away from Coronado for the last time and drove east until the Pacific disappeared from his rearview mirror, that he was done with all of it. Done with the weight of other people's lives in his hands. Done with being the kind of man who got called when things went wrong. He had almost convinced himself it was true. Then he pulled into a gas station on Route 9 on a Tuesday night in October, and a teenage boy looked up at him from the asphalt with blood on his face and something in his eyes. Not just fear, but a specific kind of desperation. The kind that comes from realizing that no one is coming, that the cavalry doesn't exist, that you are alone. And Marcus felt something crack open in his chest that he had spent 9 years cementing shut. One of the 5 men turned around. He was big, tattooed, with a serpent curling up his neck, and he looked at Marcus the way men look at something they don't think is worth worrying about. "Walk away, old man," he said. Marcus looked at the boy on the ground. He looked at the 5 men. He thought, briefly, about Tommy. About how no one had been there. About 9 years of asking himself what difference it makes. What you know, what you can do. If you're not there when it matters. You put the truck in park. He got out. "I don't walk away," he said quietly, and his voice had that particular flatness that men who have been in very dark places sometimes develop. Not angry, not afraid, just certain, the way a compass needle is certain. That's the one thing I never learned how to do. The town of Dry Creek, Arizona, was named optimistically. There had never been much of a creek, and what little water once flowed had given up decades ago, leaving behind a pale scar in the earth that locals called the Wash and used as a garbage dump during dry months, and a provisional river during the 3 days of the year when it actually rained. The town itself had a similar quality, something that had once tried harder and gradually settled into what it was: a gas station, a diner, a dollar store, a Catholic church, a Lutheran church, 3 bars, a feed store, and, since 9 years ago, Webb's Hardware and Supply. Marcus had bought the building for $32,000 cash, which was every dollar he had left after the VA benefit, after Sandra's medical bills, after the funeral, after what he thought of privately as the long year, the 12 months after Tommy that he did not like to examine too closely and would not discuss with the 2 therapists the VA had assigned him in succession. He had learned hardware the way he learned everything, methodically, thoroughly, without shortcuts. He could now tell the difference between a grade 5 and grade 8 bolt by feel alone. He knew which caulk to use around a bathtub in a dry climate versus a humid one. He could listen to a homeowner describe a plumbing problem over the phone and diagnose it in 45 seconds. He was good at it, and he was reliable, and the people of Dry Creek respected him in the particular way that small towns respect quiet, competent men. They trusted him, they used him, and they didn't ask too many questions. He was fine with that arrangement. He lived in a house behind the store, technically a separate address, but connected by a strip of gravel path he maintained himself. The house had 2 bedrooms, one of which he never opened. He kept a vegetable garden that was better than anything in town. He ate dinner alone every night at 6:30, watched the news until 8, went to bed with a book, and woke at 5:15 every morning without an alarm. He did not drink. He did not have a girlfriend. He did not attend the Lutheran or Catholic church, though Pastor Henning had tried 3 times in the first year. He ran 5 miles every morning before the store opened, and he did not look like a 52-year-old man. He looked like what he was, a man who had spent 20 years at the absolute edge of human physical capability and had never, not once, allowed himself to stop. It wasn't vanity. It was something harder to explain. Keeping the body ready was the one thing he knew how to do that still made sense, even when nothing else did. On the Tuesday the town would later mark as the night everything changed, Marcus had been closing up the store around 9 p.m. He kept late hours on Tuesdays because that was when the contractors from the outer ranches liked to come in. When he realized he was out of milk. A small thing. A Tuesday night errand that would reroute his entire life. He drove his old F-150, gray primer, no markings, 200,000 miles, and not one unnecessary feature, out on a Route 9 toward the 24-hour gas station 2 miles from his house. The night was warm the way Arizona nights are warm in October, which is to say not warm at all, but comfortable. The heat finally drained out of the rock, and the air carrying the faint smell of creosote and something mineral and old. He was listening to a country station out of Tucson, thinking about nothing particular, almost peaceful. Then he saw the gas station lights. One of the fluorescents above the pump island was flickering. That particular strobing malfunction that makes everything look like bad surveillance footage. Slightly unreal, slightly stuttered. And in the stuttering light, he saw 5 figures arranged in a loose semicircle around something on the ground. He almost didn't stop. He almost called 911 and drove on. He almost honored the deal he had made with himself 9 years ago. Then the thing on the ground moved, and he saw it was a boy, and he saw the boy look up at the flickering light with that face, that particular face, and everything he had spent 9 years carefully cementing shut cracked open like old asphalt in a summer storm. He pulled in. The boy was 16, though Marcus didn't know that yet. What he knew, in the 3 seconds between getting out of the truck and reaching the pump island, was this. The boy had already taken at least 2 blows to the face, swelling around the left eye, blood from a split above the right eyebrow. He was conscious, but not fully coordinated, and he had made the smart decision to curl against the base of the pump where they couldn't get behind him. What he also knew, 5 men, ages approximately 20 to 35, freestanding, 2 circling. The big one with the serpent tattoo had spoken and was now watching Marcus approach with the specific contempt of a man who has never been surprised by someone who looked ordinary. 2 of the others had shifted to face Marcus, which meant they were making decisions, which meant they were not amateurs. And there, on the necks of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th men, a tattoo of a coiled king cobra, rendered in green and black, scaled in fine line detail. Viper Kings. Marcus had heard the name. Everyone in Dry Creek had, the way you hear about weather systems, as something coming, as something that arrived, as something to be managed by people better equipped than you. The Vipers had been moving up from Nogales for 2 years, establishing territory in the dead zones between the big city gang networks, the places where law enforcement was thin and leverage was cheap. They were, by any reasonable measure, a serious and organized criminal enterprise. They were also, in this moment, 5 men who had been hurting a boy and needed to be stopped. Marcus had long ago made peace with the fact that he did not think like other people in moments of danger. There was no fear response, or rather, the fear response had been trained into something else, a kind of clarity, a sudden sharpening of the world into planes and distances and angles. He did not decide to fight in the way people usually decide things. He simply assessed and moved, the way water moves, without deliberation. The big one came first, as big ones always do. He threw a right hand that had behind it about 240 pounds of confidence and gravity. Marcus stepped inside it, not backward, inside, which is the move that confuses people who have learned to fight by hitting things, and drove his elbow into the man's jaw with the concentrated force of someone who had broken a plank with that elbow during training and had not forgotten the geometry of it. The big man's eyes went to glass, and he sat down. Elapsed time, 1.8 seconds. The 2nd man had a knife. Marcus saw it before it cleared the pocket, the particular shoulder movement, the shift of the hip, and he moved toward it rather than away, because a man with a knife is dangerous at 2 feet and not dangerous at 3 inches. He caught the wrist, bent it against the joint with a torque that produced a sound like greenwood snapping, and stepped back with the knife now in his own hand. The man was screaming. Marcus put the knife in his back pocket. The 3rd and 4th came together, which was smart. 2-on-1 at this range is a genuine problem, and Marcus knew it. He took the 3rd man's shoulder charge partially, letting it turn him rather than absorbing it fully, using the rotation to put his elbow into the 4th man's temple as he came in from the side. The 4th man went down. The 3rd, slightly off balance from the partial charge, got a knee strike to the solar plexus that was not theatrical and not merciful and was very, very effective. The 5th man ran. Marcus let him go. He stood there for a moment in the flickering light, breathing at exactly the same rate as before. He looked at the 4 men on the ground. The big one was unconscious. The one with the broken wrist was still making a high, continuous sound. The other 2 were conscious, but not mobile. He put the knife on the roof of his truck, while out of reach. He called 911. Then he went to the boy. The boy was trying to get up when Marcus reached him, which Marcus recognized as pride and also as potentially a sign of cervical injury. So he put a firm but gentle hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "Stay down. Help is coming. You're safe." The boy looked up at him. His left eye was swollen nearly shut. His lip was split. There was blood in his dark hair, matted above his right ear. But his gaze, the right eye, clear and dark and very young, fixed on Marcus with a directness that Marcus would not understand until he met the boy's father an hour later. 5 of them, the boy said. His voice was remarkably steady for a kid bleeding on a gas station floor. There were 5. I know. 4 of them are on the ground. The boy blinked. He looked at the men on the pavement. He looked back at Marcus. The 5th ran. A pause. You did that alone? You want to exchange compliments? Or you want me to check your head? Despite everything, the boy almost smiled. It's fine. It's not fine. Hold still. Marcus checked him quickly and efficiently. The combat first aid that never entirely leaves your hands. The same way swimming never entirely leaves your muscles. Pupils responsive. No obvious cervical instability. The cut above the eyebrow was superficial, bleeding freely the way scalp wounds do. The possible concussion was the concern. The ribs. The boy winced hard when Marcus's hands moved over his left side. 2 of them possibly cracked. What's your name? Danny. Danny Reyes. How old are you? 16. Marcus checked his phone. He'd already tried to call someone. The call log showed a name, Lena, that had gone unanswered. I already called 911, Marcus said. Ambulance is coming. Is there someone else you want me to call? Danny looked at him for a long moment. In the flickering light, he looked very young and very old at the same time. The way kids look when they've just been through something that was not supposed to happen to them. My dad, he said. Then, but he stopped. But what? Don't tell him I cried. He said it with an absolute seriousness that Marcus recognized as the kind of pride that comes from having a father you desperately want to be equal to. Okay, please, don't tell him I cried. Marcus looked at the boy. He thought about Tommy, which he did not usually allow himself to do, and there was a fist around his heart for a moment that he breathed past. I won't, he said. That's between you and me. The ambulance came. The deputies came. Marcus gave a statement to Deputy Carla Voss, who was sharp and professional and wrote everything down without editorializing. The 4 Viper Kings were collected, 3 transported under guard to the same hospital as Danny, 1 more ambulatory, and arrested at the scene. Marcus produced the knife. He drove to Mercy General because it hadn't occurred to him not to. He sat in the waiting room with a paper cup of coffee he didn't drink and watched the automatic doors. He didn't know why he was there, exactly. He told himself he wanted to make sure the kid was all right. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was something he wasn't ready to look at directly. At 11:40 p.m., the automatic doors opened and the waiting room changed. They came in 4s and 5s, big men, leather-vested, road-dusty, with the particular unhurried authority of people who are accustomed to being the most consequential thing in any room they enter. The patches on their vests said Iron Wolves in an arc over a snarling wolf's head. Dry Creek, AZ. The bottom rocker said Sonoran Chapter. Marcus counted 7, then 12, then 20. They filled the waiting room without particularly trying to. They spoke quietly to each other. Nobody was drunk, nobody was loud. Several of them had the specifically careful stillness of people who are very, very angry and very, very controlled about it. The tallest one, enormous, maybe 6'4", close-cropped beard going gray and hands like geological formations, went to the desk. He said Danny Reyes's name. His voice was the kind of deep that has more to do with the chest than the throat. The nurse told him family only. The big man looked at her steadily. I am his family, he said. Marcus stood up. He didn't know why, exactly. Some instinct. The big man's eyes swung to him. Dark eyes. Sharp. Used to reading people the way Marcus was used to reading terrain. You Webb, he said. Marcus Webb. Marcus nodded. The man looked at him for a long moment, not sizing him up for a fight. Marcus could read that distinction, more like seeing something that surprised him. Then he put out a hand the size of a dinner plate. Eduardo Reyes, he said. Danny's my boy. Tank Reyes was 58 years old in his bearing, though 48 in fact. His face had the kind of weathering that comes from decades of desert riding. Deep lines around the eyes, a jaw that looked like it had been set in concrete at around age 35 and left to cure. He wore his Iron Wolves president's patch, a rocker's set with a centered diamond of rank, and he wore it the way generals wear stars, not for show, but because it was simply what was true about him. But when the doctor came out of the ICU corridor and said Danny Reyes's name, and Tank stood up, Marcus saw something happen to the man that he recognized with a deep, unwelcome intimacy. Tank Reyes did not cry. He was not the kind of man who cried, and this was immediately obvious. But the muscles in his jaw worked in a way that told Marcus the man was doing the thing that men who don't cry do, which is to send everything inward, to find some load-bearing wall inside themselves and press their full weight against it and trust it to hold. The doctor said ribs, possible concussion, under observation, doing well, not in danger. Each word visibly reconfigured something in Tank's face. Rosa Reyes arrived between the doctor's sentence and the next. She was a small woman with large presence. Presence that doesn't announce itself but fills a room differently than before she entered it. She came in wearing a flannel shirt and no makeup, with the expression of a woman who has managed fear before and is managing it again. She went to Tank and put her hand in his, and the hand of the enormous man closed around hers and held on. Marcus watched this from across the room and felt, again, the fist around his heart. Tank came to him later, when the initial news had settled. Rosa was with Danny. The waiting room had been diplomatically cleared of other patients by the hospital administrator, who had assessed the situation with an impressive pragmatism and apparently decided that tonight the Iron Wolves were running the lobby. Tank sat across from Marcus. He put his forearms on his knees. He was quiet for a moment. "The deputy told me," he said. "What you did. 5 vipers." "It was 4. The 5th ran." Tank nodded. He looked at his hands, scarred, knuckled, a long history written in them. "I need to ask you something." "Ask. Why did you stop?" Marcus thought about the truthful version, the full version, the one that included Tommy and Sandra and 9 years of careful silence. He decided this was not the moment for that version. He was 16 years old, he said simply. Tank looked at him. The sharp dark eyes. "You could have called 911 and driven on." "I could have. But you didn't." "No." Another silence. Tank was the kind of man who respected silence, Marcus could see, who waited for words to mean something before using them. "My son," Tank said and stopped. He cleared his throat. "Tried again. My boy is the age I was when I first." He stopped again. He looked at the door behind which Danny was being watched over. "He's a good kid. He doesn't. This life isn't his. His mother and I have worked hard to make sure it's not his. He wants to be a mechanic." "Did the deputy tell you that?" "He wants to go to trade school in Flagstaff. He's got a girlfriend." Tank said this last thing with something that was almost a smile, the involuntary kind. "A nice girl. Lena. She's the one who called 911 first, before you. He snuck out to meet her, which is why he was on Route 9 at 9 at night, and why he was alone." Marcus nodded. "The Vipers," Tank said, and the word changed the air in the room the way weather changes air, something dropping in pressure, have been trying to move through our territory for 2 years. We've held the line. This was a message. "I understand." Tank looked at him. "You were military." "Navy. 20 years. Special operations?" A pause. "Yes." Tank absorbed this. Then he said, "I owe you something I cannot repay." Marcus shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. My son's life is—" Tank stopped. "The load-bearing wall. Pressing against it. That's not a debt you waive off, Mr. Webb." "Marcus. Marcus." A silence. And then, to Marcus's considerable surprise, Tank Reyes put his face in his hands for about 10 seconds. Just 10 seconds. No longer. And the enormous shoulders moved once, twice, and then went still. And when Tank took his hands away, his eyes were red-rimmed and his face was composed. And he was looking at Marcus with an expression that Marcus did not entirely have a name for. It was something like, "I see you. Not as a stranger. Not as a creditor. As someone who understood something. Rosa wants to meet you," Tank said. "When you're ready." By midnight, Big Mike had made 11 phone calls. By 2 a.m., those 11 people had made their own calls, and the calls propagated outward through the fraternal network of Iron Wolves chapters like ripples from a dropped stone. First to the other Arizona chapters, then to New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and Texas, and from there into the wider network of ally clubs that stretched along the great American Southwest like a parallel country drawn in leather and iron. The message was simple. The president's son was jumped by vipers. He's alive. A man named Marcus Webb put down 4 Viper Kings alone to save him. Danny is at mercy, General. What the message was not, what Tank had specifically told Big Mike to make clear, was a call for violence. Big Mike had said this 5 times on the first call, 8 times on subsequent ones. "We are not riding to retaliate. We are riding to show respect. Weapons stay home." This was a delicate distinction that the Iron Wolves had learned, over decades, to maintain carefully, because the difference between honoring a debt and starting a war was sometimes a matter of inches, and the Iron Wolves had been walking that line long enough to know every foothold on it. Big Mike Torrance had been with the Iron Wolves for 23 years. He was wide where Tank was tall, quieter than he looked, and possessed of a gift for logistics that would have served him well in any organization that valued the movement of many people and resources toward a common point. He did not sleep that night. He did not need to. Marcus drove home at 1 in the morning. He sat in his kitchen in the dark for a while, because he didn't feel like turning on the lights. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, the desert was doing its nighttime thing. Owls, wind, the creak and settle of his house, which was 70 years old and spoke to itself in the language of aging wood. He thought about Danny. He thought about Tommy. His son had been 19, a sophomore at Arizona State, studying environmental science, a thin kid with Marcus's jaw and Sandra's smile, who had been visiting a friend in Phoenix on a March night when he walked out of a 7-Eleven into the middle of a territorial dispute between two street gangs that had spilled out of a parking lot and across the sidewalk. He had not been involved. He had been in the wrong place. The investigation had concluded this clearly and quickly. The boy who shot him was 17, had no priors, and was sentenced to 8 years. Tommy Webb had died at the scene. There had been no one there who could have done what Marcus could have done, what Marcus had spent 20 years learning to do, and Marcus was 60 miles away, asleep, when it happened. This was the thing Marcus had spent 9 years not thinking about directly. He sat in his kitchen and thought about it now. Not with the tearing, howling grief of the first year, the grief that had scared his therapists, but with the older, quieter grief, the one that had become part of his interior landscape the way scars become part of skin. A permanent geography. You learn to live around it. Danny Reyes was alive. That was a fact that sat differently than other facts. He was not sure, yet, exactly how it sat. But he could feel its weight, and the weight was not entirely bad. He went to bed at 2 in the morning and slept without dreams, which was unusual, and woke at 5:15, which was not. Victor Salinas had not gotten to where he was by accepting loss quietly. At 31, Cobra ran the Viper King's operations across a 200-mile corridor with the efficiency of someone who had studied business the same way Marcus had studied warfare. Thoroughly, without romanticism, with a clear eye for leverage and consequence. He wore his hair short and dressed in civilian clothes almost exclusively, and drove a leased Audi, and had 3 lawyers on retainer. He learned about the gas station incident at 11 p.m., and he was not, initially, angry. He was calculating. 4 of his men down, 1 requiring surgical repair, 2 with concussions, 1 still unconscious, done by 1 man. An old man, or so his people had said, though the deputies report his lawyer acquired by 6 a.m. the next morning, said former Special Operations, Navy SEAL, which recalibrated things considerably. The Iron Wolves were a problem. They had always been a problem. A wall he couldn't push through cleanly, a border he couldn't cross without cost. But the territory north of Dry Creek was worth the cost, eventually. The question was sequencing. What Cobra had decided by noon on Wednesday was this. The message had already been sent, and retreating from it would cost more than pressing it. He would send 2 men to the hospital, not to start anything, just to remind, just to demonstrate that no waiting room full of bikers changed the fundamental calculus. This was a mistake. They came on Wednesday evening during the shift change, when the parking lot was at its most permeable. 2 Viper enforcers in an unmarked truck, wearing civilian clothes, carrying legally registered sidearms and unregistered intentions. They had been told to make an appearance, to walk through the parking lot, to let the Iron Wolves know they were seen. What they had not been told, because Cobra's intelligence was incomplete, was that Marcus Webb was still at the hospital. He hadn't meant to be. He had come back Wednesday afternoon to check on Danny. 1 visit, just to hear the kid was all right from someone other than a deputy's update. But he had found Priest in the hallway outside Danny's room, and Priest had asked him about the specific mechanics of the gas station incident with a scholarly thoroughness that Marcus found oddly engaging. And then Rosa had come out and asked if Marcus had eaten, and before he'd constructed a polite refusal, he was in the hospital cafeteria eating a bowl of soup that was nothing special and somehow the best soup he'd had in years. He was walking back to his truck in the parking lot at 6:50 p.m. when he saw the 2 men enter from the south end. He knew immediately, not because of anything theatrical, no weapons visible, no threatening behavior. He knew because of the walk. There's a particular walk that men have when they are on an errand they've been told is casual, but that they know is not. A walk that is trying too hard to be at ease, that is performing rather than being. He had watched that walk through night vision scopes at 300 meters, and he knew it the way a musician knows a wrong note. He stepped to the side of a parked van and watched them move through the lot. They were heading toward the bank of windows on the ICU wing. Marcus took out his phone and typed a 3-word text to Big Mike, whose number he'd been given that morning. 2 men, South Lot. He hit send. 60 seconds later, 6 iron wolves appeared at the south parking lot entrance. The 2 Viper enforcers stopped. They looked at 6 men in leather, 7 counting the big, quiet civilian standing slightly to one side. They did the math. One of them reached for his phone. "Don't," Marcus said. Not loudly, not angrily, just as a piece of information. The man looked at him. Then he looked at the 6 iron wolves. Then he put his phone back in his pocket. "You tell Cobra," Big Mike said, his voice carrying the specific weight of a man who has never needed to shout, "that this hospital is not Viper territory. It is not Iron Wolves territory. It is a place where sick people are. If you come back here, Cobra will hear from our lawyers," one of the men said. He'd found his feet again, found his professional register. "Cobra will hear from ours," Tank said, stepping out of a side door, his hands in his jacket pockets, his voice absolutely level. "But that conversation will happen after I personally demonstrate to both of you the original meaning of the word message." Assailants. The 2 men left. In the parking lot, Tank looked at Marcus. "How did you see them coming?" "The walk," Marcus said. Tank looked at him for a long moment. "I need to understand," Tank said, "what kind of man you are." "Just a man," Marcus said. "No," Tank said, with certainty. "You're not." Sheriff Dale Morrison had been the elected sheriff of Dry Creek County for 11 years, which was 9 years more than his competence warranted, and just long enough for certain accommodations to have settled into the comfortable shape of habit. He was not a bad man, exactly. He was the kind of man who had started with genuine intentions and been gradually, incrementally reshaped by the path of least resistance. A campaign donation here, a case that didn't need pursuing there, a friendship with a local businessman who turned out to have interests that were easier not to examine closely. He had not done these things all at once. He had done them one small step at a time, which is how most compromises are made. On Thursday morning, Morrison came to Webb's Hardware and Supply with 2 deputies and a form. "Mr. Webb," he said, with the particular careful politeness of a man doing something he knows is wrong and trying to make it look procedural, "there are concerns about the level of force used on Tuesday night. 4 men were hospitalized. One has a broken wrist requiring surgical repair. There are questions about proportionality. There was 1 person on the ground," Marcus said. "There were 5 people hurting him. I stopped them. The extent of the injuries is proportional to the number of people I had to stop and the speed at which I had to stop them." Morrison shifted his weight. "Mr. Webb, I am not in a position to simply Dale." Morrison stopped. Marcus rarely used first names. "You were at the gas station Tuesday night," Marcus said. "Not personally, but your department was called." The 5th man ran. "Your deputy logged the call at 9:14 and the 1st unit arrived at 9:41. 27 minutes, Dale. For an active assault in progress." Morrison's jaw worked. "I understand you have relationships," Marcus said quietly. "That makes certain things complicated. That is your business, and I have left it as your business for 9 years. But if you come to this counter and tell me that defending a 16-year-old from 5 grown men is a prosecutable offense in your county, then we will find out together what kind of town this is." The store was not empty. 3 customers, a rancher from the eastern county, a contractor from outside of town, and Marlene from the diner across the street, who had come in for reasons that would later be unclear, but whose timing was impeccable, were present and quiet in the way of people who know they are witnessing something and have the good sense to pay attention. Morrison looked at his form. He looked at Marcus. He looked, briefly, at the 3 witnesses. Deputy Carla Voss, standing 2 steps behind Morrison and to his left, cleared her throat. She produced a tablet. "Sheriff," she said, "the gas station camera footage from Tuesday night became available this morning. I've reviewed it. It shows a minor being assaulted by 5 adult males for approximately 3 minutes prior to Mr. Webb's arrival. Mr. Webb's intervention lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. She paused. "The footage is clear and complete." Morrison looked at the tablet. He looked at Marcus. He looked at Voss with an expression that mixed anger and relief in a proportion that communicated, very clearly, "I am grateful to have been handed an exit. We'll be in touch if we need anything further," he said. He left. Voss stayed for 1 moment. She met Marcus's eyes and gave him a nod that was not quite a smile, but carried all the same information. "Deputy," Marcus said. "Mr. Webb," she said and left. They heard it before they saw it. It started as a vibration, the kind you feel in the ground before you hear it in the air, the way earthquakes begin, the way thunder introduces itself before it arrives. The people of Dry Creek who were outside on Thursday afternoon at 3 p.m. felt it in their feet before they looked up, and when they looked up, They saw the distant shimmer on Route 9 that resolved, as it approached, into something that had no precedent in the history of the town. 600 motorcycles. They came in a formation that was not random, not a crowd, not a mob, but a procession, a deliberate moving structure. 3 abreast where the road allowed it. In the lead, a formation of 12 Iron Wolves officers. Behind them, the General Assembly, New Mexico red and white, Nevada black and silver, Utah colors in brown and gold, Texas chapters running 4 abreast down the center line. The sound of it was not the Hollywood roar of motorcycles in movies, but something more complex, more layered. The bass note that holds an orchestra together, a sound you felt in your sternum, in your back teeth, and somewhere below articulation that had no precise name. Marcus was standing outside the front entrance of Mercy General when they came. He had not been told to be there. Tank had simply texted him that morning, 3 p.m., front entrance, don't leave, and Marcus had understood the implied gravity. He stood there in his clean flannel shirt. He'd gone home and changed, he wasn't sure why, with his arms at his sides, and he watched them come. The hospital staff came to the windows. The nurses who had been rotating Danny's shifts came outside without entirely deciding to. The administrator stood on the front steps with the expression of a woman witnessing something unprecedented and having chosen to witness it with dignity. They filled the parking lot. They filled the street. They lined both sides of the long drive from Route 9 to the hospital entrance, and they parked their bikes and they stood beside them. And when they were arranged, all 600 of them, in leather and iron and road-grade colors from chapters in 5 states, a silence fell that was, in its way, as loud as the engines had been. Tank came out of the hospital doors. Behind him came Danny, in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse, Rosa at his side. Danny's eye was still swollen, his ribs wrapped under his t-shirt, his expression a complicated mixture of self-consciousness and stunned awe. He was a 16-year-old boy looking at something he would carry for the rest of his life, and he knew it, and the knowing made him very still. Tank put his hand on Danny's shoulder. He looked at Marcus. "Stand here," Tank said simply. Marcus stepped to Tank's right. He felt, briefly, absurd. A 52-year-old man who ran a hardware store, standing beside the president of an outlaw motorcycle club at the center of 600 people who had ridden hundreds of miles for reasons he still didn't entirely understand. Then Tank raised his right fist. 600 fists went up in answer. Not a cheer, not a chant, just the raised fist, held, the ancient gesture of solidarity and honor, the salute that warriors give each other across language and uniform and century. It was completely, profoundly silent. Marcus stood very still. He could feel his heartbeat in the scar tissue on his left hand where a piece of shrapnel had entered 22 years ago in a country that no longer existed under the name it had then. He could feel the Arizona air, warm and dry, moving through the parking lot. He could feel the presence of 600 people who had come for him, for a man they didn't know. And he could feel the weight of it, the specific weight of being seen, of being counted, of being told by 600 people simultaneously that what you did mattered. He was not the kind of man who cried. He breathed very carefully and deliberately for about 10 seconds, and when he was sure of his face, he raised his right fist in return. The sound that answered was not a chant or a cheer. It was 600 men and women hitting their hands on their gas tanks, their seats, their handlebars, a rolling thunder of leather on metal that went up and down the line like a wave. 600 individual beats, becoming one sustained roar that Marcus felt not just in his chest, but in the back of his throat, in some place below articulation that he did not have words for. From the wheelchair, Danny looked up at Marcus with his one good eye. "Cool," Danny said quietly, with the profound understatement of someone trying very hard not to cry in front of 600 bikers. Marcus looked down at him. "Yeah," he said. After the formal assembly, the gathering loosened, became something between a party and a vigil. People in small groups in the parking lot, food appearing from somewhere. Big Mike had apparently arranged food trucks, because Big Mike arranged everything. The particular warm chaos of a large group brought together by an urgent thing and now allowed to simply be together. Marcus was not left alone. People came to him in a way that was different from how civilians usually approach strangers. Not tentative, not making small talk, but direct and uncomplicated, the way soldiers approach each other on base, with the shared assumption of a common language. An older man from the Utah chapter, 65, gray beard, hands like Marcus's, the particular posture of a man who has once been very capable and knows it, shook his hand without a word and held it for a moment. and Marcus understood from the grip in the eyes that this was a veteran's acknowledgement, specific and wordless and sufficient. A woman from the New Mexico chapter, 50s, sergeant-at-arms patch, a scar on her cheekbone that spoke of some history Marcus didn't need the details of, told him her daughter had been jumped walking home from school 6 months ago, and no one had intervened, and looked at him with a directness that wasn't accusation and wasn't gratitude, but was something more like, "You did a thing that needed doing, and I needed to know that people like you exist." Marcus stood with all of this. He was not comfortable with it. He had never been comfortable with recognition, had always been more at ease with the task than with the acknowledgement of the task, but he did not deflect it or minimize it, because he understood that this was not about him. It was about what the act represented. He was a vessel for something the community needed to affirm about itself. Priest found him at the edge of the parking lot, where Marcus had positioned himself with a cup of real coffee someone had brought in a machine and the particular quietness of a man who needs some air. Father Gabriel Rocha had been a genuine priest for 8 years before a crisis of vocation and a crisis of faith had arrived simultaneously and stripped him down to something that had then rebuilt itself differently. He had been with the Iron Wolves for 14 years, functioning as moral philosopher, ethical counsel, and spiritual anchor, not a chaplain in any formal sense, but the person you went to when the weight of what you were became too much to carry alone. He was 53, with the lean quality of an ascetic and the eyes of someone who had stopped pretending he had all the answers and had found this to be a profound relief. He stood beside Marcus in companionable silence for a moment. "You're uncomfortable," Priest said. "A little," Marcus said. "With the attention, or with what it means that you're here at all?" Marcus looked at him. "Are those different things?" "They are. The attention is external. What it means is yours." Marcus was quiet for a moment. The parking lot hummed with voices and the smell of food and the specific social warmth of a large group. "I had a son," Marcus said. He had not said this to anyone in Dry Creek. Not in 9 years. He had said it once to the VA therapist, who had noted it and moved on to medication options, and he had said it to Sandra's grave, once, 2 years after she died, in a conversation that had helped more than he expected. He said it now to a former priest standing in a biker-filled hospital parking lot in Arizona, and it came out sounding like what it was, the sentence that held the most weight of anything he had ever said. "Tommy," he said. He was 19. He was killed. Gang violence. Technically, though he stopped. He was just in the wrong place. Nobody was there who could. He stopped again. Nobody was there. Priest was quiet. He did not say "I'm sorry," because "I'm sorry" is what people say when they don't know what else to say, and Priest always knew what else to say. "Did you know," Priest said finally, "that the Greek word for witness, martyr, originally just meant someone who sees, not someone who dies, someone who was present, someone who can say, 'I was there. I saw.'" Marcus looked at him. "You were not there for Tommy," Priest said. "That is a fact you have carried. But you were there for Danny, and you cannot save Tommy with that. But you also cannot say," he paused, choosing carefully, "you also cannot say that you are a man who is not there when it matters. Because you were there. You were there, and you did not look away, and Danny is in that hospital talking to his mother about mechanic school in Flagstaff." The parking lot continued its warm noise around them. Marcus drank his coffee. He looked at the horizon, which in Dry Creek is what you look at when there is too much in the middle distance. "There's a room in my house," he said. "I don't open it." Priest said nothing. "Tommy's room. I haven't opened it since he died." Priest was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "When you're ready. Now you should open it. Now you'll feel better. Just, when you're ready." Marcus nodded. They stood together in the parking lot as the afternoon light went gold and amber over the desert, and neither of them said anything else for a while. And this was, Marcus thought, the most he had talked to another person in 9 years. The federal case against Victor Salinas and the Viper Kings had been building for 18 months before the events of that October. What it had needed, what federal cases of this type always need, was a public incident, a documentable moment, a crack in the operational surface through which investigators could lever open the rest. The attack on Danny Reyes, with its gas station camera footage, its hospital parking lot incident captured on Mercy General's security system, and the subsequent visit by Cobra's lawyers to Sheriff Morrison, a conversation overheard by Deputy Carla Voss and documented with the kind of administrative thoroughness she had been quietly developing for 14 months, provided the crack. The federal warrant landed on a Monday morning, 5 days after the salute. It was, in the language of law enforcement, a comprehensive document. Charges spanning drug trafficking, organized extortion, an interstate criminal conspiracy. Cobra's 3 lawyers did what excellent lawyers do in these situations. 2 of them immediately began negotiating cooperation arrangements with their other clients, and one of them called Cobra to say the word federal in a sentence, which is never a conversation that ends well for the person receiving the call. Sheriff Morrison, facing a parallel investigation into his department's relationship with the Viper Kings, resigned on a Wednesday. He was not, in the end, prosecuted, which some people felt was insufficient and others felt was pragmatic. Marcus felt nothing about it, because Morrison was small, and small problems solving themselves was just time doing its work. What Marcus cared about was the Tuesday evening when Tank Reyes came to the hardware store. It was after closing. Marcus was mopping. This was the meditative end of his day. The systematic going over of the floor, the straightening of shelves, the small quiet acts of maintenance that structured the hours after 6. He heard the truck pull up, and he looked out the window, and he unlocked the door. Tank came in alone, which was unusual. Big Mike was in the truck. Rosa was home. This was Tank as a private person, outside the structure of the club. Rare, Marcus had come to understand. He put something on the counter. It was a challenge coin. Brass, heavy, about the diameter of a silver dollar, with the Iron Wolves crest on one side and on the other, an inscription, for the man who stood when it mattered. Iron Wolves, Sonoran chapter. Marcus looked at it. That doesn't make you a member, Tank said. We don't do honorary memberships. That's not how it works. I understand. It means you are known to us, protected by us, welcome in any Iron Wolves clubhouse in the country, in perpetuity. Tank paused. It means that if you are ever in a position where 5 men are closing in on you, you will not have to handle it alone. Marcus picked up the coin. It was warm from Tank's jacket pocket, and heavier than it looked. Danny called me this morning, Tank said. From the hospital. He said he wants to do his trade school internship at your hardware store next summer, if you'll have him. Marcus looked up. Tank's face was composed, as always. But the eyes, the dark, sharp eyes that Marcus had come to understand held considerably more than they showed. Were doing the thing they did when Tank was speaking his actual truth rather than his presented truth. He said you were the first adult who told him something and kept it, Tank said. The thing about not telling me, he cried. Tank paused. He told me himself, later. He was ready, but he said it mattered that you kept the secret until he was. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He can come, Marcus said. You need to learn basic inventory management, supplier relationships, load-bearing calculations. It's not glamorous. He'll work, Tank said. He knows how. Assailants. The hardware stores settled around them. The smell of sawdust and metal, the hum of the cooler, the specific quality of a building that has been carefully maintained for a long time. I'm going to open a room in my house, Marcus said. Tank looked at him. My son's room. It's been 9 years. Tank was quiet. He understood, Marcus could see, without needing it explained. A man who had sat in a hospital corridor pressing all his weight against himself to keep from breaking understood, without explanation, what it was to have a room that holds the weight of a life. You want someone there when you do? Tank said. Marcus thought about it. He thought about the 9 years of careful, necessary solitude. He thought about when you're ready, and about the parking lot and the 600 raised fists and the coin, warm from someone else's pocket, sitting in his hand. Maybe, he said. Call me, Tank said. Whatever time. You put out his hand, and Marcus shook it, and that was the conversation. 6 months later, Marcus's hardware store looked mostly the same, because Marcus was constitutionally opposed to change for its own sake, and saw no reason to alter what functioned well. There were 2 differences. The first, on the counter beside the register, in a simple wooden frame, was a photograph. It had been taken by one of the food truck vendors on the afternoon of the salute, slightly overexposed, slightly at an angle, with the characteristic imperfection of a casual shot taken at precisely the right moment. It showed Marcus and Tank standing side by side at the hospital entrance, Rosa beside Tank, Danny in the wheelchair, all 4 of them looking not at the camera, but at the assembled crowd. 600 silhouettes in the Arizona afternoon light, fists raised, the desert going gold and amber behind them. Marcus had printed it at the pharmacy on Main Street. He had not announced that he was putting it up. He had just put it up, and nobody commented on it directly, which in Dry Creek meant everyone had seen it and understood it completely. The second difference, on his keychain, turning quietly beside his truck key and his store key and the small brass key to the storage room, there was a challenge coin. In May, Danny Reyes arrived at Webb's Hardware and Supply at 7:45 a.m. on a Monday, 20 minutes early for his 8 o'clock start, in a clean t-shirt and work boots. He had his trade school enrollment confirmation on his phone and a question about supplier markup that he'd clearly been sitting with on the drive over. Marcus was opening the register when Danny came through the door, and he looked at the boy, at the healed eyebrow, the easy, confident walk, the father's eyes, and he said, "You're early." "My dad says early is on time," Danny said. "Your dad is right. Grab the broom. We sweep before we open." Danny grabbed a broom. They swept in companionable silence, and the morning light came through the front windows of Webb's Hardware and Supply and lay itself across the worn wooden floor, and outside, Route 9 began its quiet daily commerce. And somewhere in the distance, too far to hear, but close enough to imagine, a motorcycle engine turned over and settled into its long, low, satisfied note. In September, Marcus Webb opened the door to Tommy's room for the first time in 9 years. He did it alone, at 7 in the morning, in the particular clear light of an Arizona autumn day. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, and then he stepped through. The room was unchanged and full of dust, and absolutely, unbearably itself. He sat on the edge of the bed for a while. He held the framed photograph from the dresser, Tommy at 17, grinning at something off camera, wearing a hat too big for his head. He held it the way you hold something very precious and very fragile, with both hands, with stillness. He did not cry. He was not the kind of man who cried. But he said his son's name, out loud, in the quiet room, in the house that held him, in the town that had come to know him, and the words sat in the air for a moment and did not disappear. Tommy. The room held it. Marcus held it. Outside, somewhere, a challenge coin turned on a keychain in the light, and somewhere, a 16-year-old boy was sweeping a hardware store floor and thinking about trade school and the girlfriend named Lena and the man who had stood up when nobody else was standing. And the desert did what the desert does. It endured, and it was quiet, and it held all of it. The grief and the redemption and the 600 raised fists and the single ordinary man who had not, in the end, been able to walk away, and it turned its face toward another morning.